One of the inspirations of this talk was by an article in the Straits Times by Roland Chu, where Chu introduced this idea of thinking about the future. The article was last year during SG 2050. And it highlighted a number of possible utopian and dystopian trajectories for Singapore. And that's one of the reasons why we want to have this event. What might be the utopian futures, but also what might be the dystopian futures. Some of the provocations that our keynotes are going to touch on, we'll link to that. We've got a full agenda. You hopefully have that in your kits, so take a look at that. The provocations are toggling between panels. So we have 4 panels of amazing local scholars, and then we have 4 provocations. Before I introduce our first provocation, I just want to touch on a couple of things from my own brief experience in Singapore. I've only been living here for a little bit more than a year, and I was teaching a course this past semester called HS 3004, a sociology course, Cities and Urban Life. And these, you can't see them clearly, but these are some of the students in my course. And actually, some of them are volunteering here today, kindly enough. And those students went around the city and they were doing spatial studies of the city. And they were looking at how everyday city space is being used by Singaporeans. And one of the aspects that they were looking at was the politics of space. So the challenge for me became getting the students to think about how everyday space could be political, because they're not quite used to thinking about, maybe both from a Singapore perspective, in the broader sense, thinking about politics or nerves or nervousness about talking about politics, but also seeing everyday space in a political sense. So we know about the kind of warnings, right? Beware of falling coconuts. Beware of breaking branches. Beware of durian, falling durians. Or the scanscapes, right? The camera spaces, the surveillance spaces. One of the things that I taught in my class, that I talked to my students about as a tool for analyzing power, is a very old tool. It's called Arnstein's Ladder of Public Participation. And this old kind of continuum, it's a very simple continuum. It comes from the 1968 or 69. It's taught in a lot of urban planning schools. Has on the bottom manipulation, therapy, and then informing. The middle rungs are consultation, placation. And then as we move up the ladder, we have the idea of partnership, delegated power, and even citizen control. So we can think of this as sort of empowered civil society or citizen power. So that continuum is a very useful tool for students to analyze power structures, institutional frameworks, how consultation takes place or doesn't take place. So the question then that I want to raise in the workshop as my own provocation is, who gets to participate in the making of the future, the making of city places and spaces? These are some pictures near my house. Again, they might not be so clear. I found a displaced turtle in the neighborhood. I live near Bukit Gombak, and there's a large public state land where I go bike riding. During the weekdays, it's military exercises, so I don't want to hang out for too long. But actually, some locals have renegade gardens in there, and the first weekend I was like, oh, military land, this is maybe not a good thing. And some local bicyclists were like, come on in. And then the military guys were waving to me, like as in, come on in, Huan Lin, welcome, right? So, but lately now it's being transformed. And we're going to see some new development there. So one of our panelists is going to talk about nature. What is the fate of nature in the future Singapore? Right? And there's been other work on this idea of policies moving around, the Singapore model, right? Chun Piu Pao over at NUS Geography has done work on this, the Singapore model as it moves around the world. What happens when the Singapore model is exported? The Singapore model of urbanism, of urban design, of urban policy and space making. What happens, when Raffles City or a lookalike ends up in Shanghai, or when There are housing developments like the Tianjin Eco-City, right, or the new capital city in India. So, and Erica Yap has also looked at Marina Bay just over here, right? How was Marina Bay assembled? I took this picture just before Gardens by the Bay was assembled and built. And you can see before Moshe Safdie's casino, right? The Marina Bay Sands, it doesn't have the boat on it at that point in time, right? When I took the picture, it doesn't have the ark. I tend to think of it as like maybe if climate change is really heavy duty, we can just get on the boat in the designer pool and then go off to wherever there's high ground. There it is, completed. Moshe Safdie is a Canadian-Israeli architect, actually. His first PhD project was in Montreal, where I was working last, and it was called Habitat, a very different project, a public housing project in Montreal done for Expo 1967. Yeah, Habitat. This is inside one of the domes at Gardens by the Bay. They have education programs. They do eco-education. They have an ambassadors program. There's a lot of good things. But there's also questions. Who's on the board of directors? We have KPMG, Ernst & Young, Ascendus Hospitality Trust, Charter CPA Accountants Group, right? ICBC Bank. We also have the public sector, obviously, right? It's NParks, so MND is represented. People's Association's represented. National Business Federation. But this is one way of assembling space. And I would argue that on the continuum, on Arnstein's ladder, it's not so consultative. We also have McDonald's, right? So you can dine at McDonald's. So there's a sort of commercial aspect to public space. So in some of my work, and I'm not going to elaborate on that because I want to introduce Ananya, I'm contrasting the assemblage of the Gardens by the Bay to a ground-up approach. And I'm looking at Kampong Campus by the Ground Up Initiative. It's a Singapore-based NGO. They're up near the Bishan area. And they want to build a campus. They're calling it Kampong Campus, an educational space. They're doing brick making, they're doing gardening. They have a maker space. We're going to learn more about maker spaces today. So it's a very different approach than Gardens by the Bay in terms of engagement. Here's a picture of Marina Bay Sands again. So what kind of future does this hold? Also, another one of my critiques of this area, especially the newer areas, is they're very automobile-oriented. In terms of pedestrian rights, minimalist pedestrian rights. It's an afterthought, in my view. So who makes urban futures? Is it a financial and casino economy future? Our next speaker is going to, I don't know if she's going to answer this question. And we want you to look at some of these questions as well, right? Again, we don't want this to sort of be from the panel to you.